Hey, welcome to Ed, a podcast about the teaching life. This is Conversation 79, and I'm your host, Shane Lawrence. Ed is a proud member of the Alberta Podcast Network, powered by ATB. And joining me this week, for the first time, are two guests. This week I'm joined by teachers, research enthusiasts, and podcast hosts Michael, Ralph, and Laurence Woodruff. And a note before we dive into this, these guys actually had me on their show as well, which will be coming out in just a couple of days if you're listening to this right upon release. So you can head over to 2pintplc.com to check out their side of the conversation as well. All right, here we go.
How are you doing this fine afternoon?
I'm doing well. How are you guys doing?
We're all right, we're all right.
Right on.
Yeah.
Right on.
I'm all right. We're getting through it.
Right on. Well, thanks for taking the time out to be on my show. I really appreciate that, guys. I do usually have one sort of thing that I like to start off with. And so let's start there. Michael and Laurence, can each of you sort of just give me a quick little précis, if you will, of what it is that you do in the education space?
So I'm Michael Ralph. I work with the Center for STEM Learning at KU. So one of our biggest jobs is to operate the You Can Teach program. So I teach pre-service teachers is what I do during my day job. Mm-hmm. My primary responsibility is the research methods course within that track. Although I do many other things within the program. That was the marquee reason that I was hired, which is late in our program and basically focuses on teaching the nature of the inquiry process, so that our graduates then have an understanding of how to do inquiry so that they can support their students doing inquiries in their classrooms. So that's my day job.
I have completed my sixth year being a high school science teacher, teaching mostly dual enrollment biology course, some general biology to ninth graders, and chemistry on occasion.
So you're kind of a science nerd guy then.
I am kind of that, yes.
Sorry, that was as I was saying, I'm like, that's a little presumptuous. You might just be, a regular bio guy who's like, not a nerd. But I don't know. I don't know any of those bio teachers who aren't nerds. So
very well.
Yes. Although I'm a nerd. I'm right there with you. But our bio teacher at our school, she actually has bees. She keeps bees, and I love talking to her about bees. She's such a nerd for it, but man, just such a fascinating species, this fascinating thing, that just how the whole thing works. Anyway, here we are.
Yeah, I love the idea of bees because they're so ecologically important, and the work is, we're learning a lot about animal behavior as we study bees. Actually, the guest on our show for the episode that's about to come out raised bees for a little while, if I remember correctly. A good friend of mine from college is a professional bee researcher. That is still what he does. But I have a phobia of stingers and cannot work with bees. Will not do it.
My dad is right now visiting me from Colorado, where my mom in their backyard maintains a beehive, and he brought me a jar of fresh honey from their hive.
Awesome.
Yeah.
That's a win. But you're right. Bees are difficult things to deal with. I mean, I have a 4-year-old daughter, and I'm trying to explain to her that bees are really important and they're really good and they do wonderful things. But also, if you touch them or get in their way, they will sting you and hurt you very badly.
Mm-hmm.
And that doesn't.
Many of them will. Not all of them. There are some stingless species, but yeah, I don't care about that. I will flee all of them.
Yeah, exactly. You're not going to stick around and sort of take a look around the backside and say, is there a stinger there or not?
I might.
Oh, okay.
I might. I was at a grad party, I guess a month ago or so, where there was a big waspy thing right on the table, and a bunch of the kids freaked out. And I just put my hand there. It crawled onto my hand. I moved my hand over the deck and shook it off, and everything was fine because they don't bother me. And I've been stung enough to know that doesn't bother me either. It's like a particularly irritated mosquito bite. It doesn't.
Oh, really?
It's like a sharp sting for a little bit, and then it's just an annoying bump. So I just have zero fear of being stung by any of the stuff around here. I know that there are terrible insects in the world that I would not want to be stung by, but they are not living here in Kansas, so we're fine.
Yeah, fair enough. I mean, you see some of the images of the insects that frequent other climates. I'm just I'm glad I don't live there, because I would just be screaming down the street every day.
Yeah.
Well, the nice thing, if we're gonna, the education piece of me thinks about what I actually would like to do with bees is there's a lot of really interesting, like, I don't want to say remote sensing, but there's a lot of like sensor work that you can do that I've seen. My friend Danny Najera is his name. And he has shared some stuff about monitoring the internal temperatures of hives as an indicator of hive health and predicting hive collapse. And so, especially as an indicator, as a bioindicator of climate change. So watching the beehives, how their temperatures go up and down in response to the seasons and the time of year, as an indicator for how climate change is affecting them and the quality and stability of the hives. And that's super interesting to me. He's made some really compelling data analytics to share all that. And I really love the idea of putting in sensors, and I don't have to be near them in order to watch those sensors. So like I could see myself contributing to that space. It's never come up to this point.
Yeah, that'd be a fascinating project for students, even, having a class beehive or something like that, and maybe with some nice remote sensors. But
the complexities about beehives in schools is that, you've got a school of 2,000 kids and a handful of them have lethal allergies. So you really have to regulate that pretty conscientiously.
That's true. Just, line the beehive area with peanut butter so that all those kids can't get in. Right.
There you go. That's pretty good. There you go.
File that under bad ideas. So the thing that really strikes me about you guys, I mean, we met because your podcast that you do, 2 Pint PLC, and I mean, it pulls together three things that I really enjoy, which is education, podcasting, and beer. So I mean, I had to reach out to you guys. But,
thank you.
But other than, the one thing besides the beer thing, which is really cool, and that sort of sets you apart. But the other thing is, you seem to have a really strong focus on research, and I mean, it's makes sense, Michael, given what you do, teaching research methods to teachers. But if we're going to bring that into the classroom, I mean, what kind of things do you want teachers to bring into the classroom in terms of research methods? Does that make sense?
Yeah,
it's a great question.
I assume that's directed to me. So Michael Ralph's answer, research methods, I am a really strong proponent of inquiry as a primary instructional methodology. So, I think science should be a performing art. That's what we should be doing. So get their hands on authentic phenomena and help them ask meaningful driving questions. And that really closely mirrors the professional research space. So if I'm talking about my priorities for my students and what they take from research methods, we don't spend lots of time on the tremendous depth of statistical techniques that is often associated with research methods and like the graduate level. We kind of stop short of a lot of that hypothesis testing and beyond, and really focus on experimental design. I'm really upregulating modeling. So how does modeling facilitate the research process in creating testable predictions and potential explanations of things and mathematical underpinnings of phenomena? So I think weaving all of that together in a way that they can then provide a space for their students to experience that same process is my top priority. So I want a teacher who is a graduate of UCAN Teach to be comfortable saying, let's ask this one really good question, and then let's spend some time letting the students bring tools to bear on that question and collecting observations and critiquing their process so far. So I really want the teachers to have enough experience and expertise to be comfortable leading that, and then also be adept in guiding and providing feedback to the students as they do that.
Okay. I got to dig into this some more because, I mean, I used to teach English. I don't anymore. I mean, Lawrence, maybe you can actually speak to this as well. I mean, do you do much research in your class with your students?
Doing research in my class with my students, no. I think the short answer to that is I don't do much research with my students in my class. My impetus for this sort of research podcast is about it's about education research. It is not about. Generating new scientific knowledge necessarily for the human body as a whole, although that happens in education research. It is about how do we take these findings and change our personal behaviors in the classroom to get that much better performance out of ourselves and our students? It's how does the research affect me as a teacher? And I think that's an important question because one, hold on a second.
Yep.
In my teacher education program, one of the things that our instructors told us is that we are the science nerds, as you addressed at the beginning of the show here. We are the science nerds. And what worked for us in the classroom is kind of an outlier effect. Most students aren't necessarily getting the experience, and my mind was focused about science, but this may be true of other disciplines as well. They may not be getting the classroom experience that works for them. And so what happens is the weirdos that those experiences worked for grew up, liked it, wanted to go back into teaching, and then propagated those experiences. And so there's this library of legacy practices, things that are the way it's done because it's always been done that way. This sort of like really hard to change system of practices and interactions. And those do not systemically serve all of our students. And so if you're just going and saying, this is what school is like, I'm going to be a teacher because I like that, then you're actually propagating some problematic practices. And so how do we change that? If I am the science nerd and I liked the boring science classes, but that's just a wrong thing to do for the hundreds of students that I'm going to contact, well, what do I do? What should I do? Well, that's what education research is for, exploring that question. So how do I change my behaviors to be more consistent with education research is how I improve myself as a teacher. So we have so many responsibilities as teachers. Just everyone listening to this knows that it goes on and on and on and on. So carving out that time to read studies, to contemplate what that study means for our classroom, what does that study mean for me, and what do I have to change next year, is something that you have to make a priority if you intend to not be a second-year teacher forever. And since I want every year of my practice to be better than the prior year, I need to constantly read, reflect, and change what I'm doing. And that's what I want to get out of my podcast.
Awesome. I can hear the crowd just applauding. Yeah, woo, that's amazing. That was good. That was your was it Bill Paxton in Independence Day? This will be our Independence Day.
Oh yeah, the president.
Yeah. I think it was Bill Paxton. Anyway, that's what I was thinking of. Like, that's good. But I like how clear you are about this. So I'm going to lobby a softball here. But do you think that research is something that all teachers should be doing then?
Doing. You keep saying doing research.
Am I getting this wrong?
Well, I'm not doing any research. And
reading research, is that the way we should?
Yeah.
Okay.
That's what it is.
Sorry.
And that's okay, because there's nothing wrong with teachers doing research. I can go get a PhD and do some research, and that'd be great.
You can do research without the PhD.
I can do research without a PhD. And I think to some extent, teachers are kind of often do kind of like informal probing of their classroom. Like, I tried this, it didn't work. I tried that, it was better, so I'm going to stick to this other thing. And that's good. I mean, we have to respond to our environments. But if there are other people that are, trying things with thousands of kids and getting more dependable responses, then those are more dependable behaviors that I can rely on. I think that people should be comparing their practices to the education research base and responding to that improving information. Because, we go to school, whenever we go to school, we go to college, we get, hey, this is how we should be teaching. And then maybe we go and maybe, let's say we're idyllic and we employ all of those things that I learned in 2010, and that's great. But there have been new gains in our profession since 2010, and neglecting that means that I am a stagnant 2010 teacher when I could be a 2017, 2018 professional.
I like that. So, thank you for correcting me. I like the idea that it's not doing research, it's experiencing research, reading research, and then put it into practice. I mean, we're talking about best practices here,
We are
essentially.
talking about best practices, essentially, yes.
And Lawrence, I think you were saying about that it's difficult to implement that, though. And I mean, I know very close secondhand, because my wife, her job for a year working in healthcare was to implement 22 clinical guidelines to do with fasting pre-surgery. And that had been heavily researched, came out of the EU, and really great science, lots of great numbers to back it up. And it took her, that full year, and even then she wasn't quite done, but she had mat leave and whatnot. But I mean, just to actually get people on board with just these simple things, which essentially had to do with when you eat and how early you eat before surgery. And it was a Herculean task to get that to change because, healthcare education, they're great big ships, and it's hard to steer them because there's so much weight behind, like you say, the way we've always done things. So what have you discovered then in getting around some of those barriers? I mean, how do you steer this great big ship, or is it just be the change you want to see in the world?
Well, one of the beautiful things about having a podcast with two hosts is that we actually approach this question differently. He and I kind of have different visions. Now, I don't think either of us would argue with the statement, be the change you want to see in the world. But I am primarily concerned with what I do in my classroom, and you guys do whatever the heck you want. That's your problem. I want to improve what I do in my classroom. But as Mr. Ralph said, he teaches at a university. He is pushing on the rudder of the ship. That's a different thing. So both of us kind of look at this differently. I don't know if you have anything to add to that.
It's just, I was kind of smirking over here because in your story you mentioned you compared education and healthcare. And it's funny you say that because we just a few months ago were reading a study that said education and healthcare in particular have some particular problems with being responsive to the research base because of the nature of those two specific fields. So it's funny that you compare those because, yep, that's consistent with the research. But it is a big job because it's so heavily dependent on the human element, so the professionalism of the practitioners. And so automation can only do so much. We have to get better as professionals to be better educators at the end of the day. And so as Lawrence was mentioning earlier, it's exhausting to comb through research constantly, right? It takes a ton of time. We have so many other things to be doing. We've got marking, we've got planning, we've got meetings, we've got 504s. I mean, we've got 100 other things to be doing. And it's just hard to fit it in, which ultimately comes back around to why I wanted to start the show in the first place. I really like sitting around and talking with Woodruff about anything, honestly. I just sitting and talking to him. Yeah. But hopefully, with my new position at the university, I have access to more of the research, and so I can spend some time processing that and making it available to teachers who really want to be doing the best things for their students, but have an opportunity cost for that kind of thing. If it's the choice is that, or stay after school and help a student with a task on which they're struggling, that's an easy call, right? Like, yeah, come on in, let's work on that, and I'll do this other thing later. So, it ultimately boils down to if I can do something that makes education research more accessible to more teachers and more busy professionals, I think that puts us in a better place as a profession. I think that's something that we ought to be doing.
So how do you make these kind of resources available, like more accessible? I mean, I guess there's a podcast, but I mean, is there anyone out there? Because I'm going to confess here, I mean, I feel like intellectually I'm a little in over my head here right now. Like, you guys are clearly very smart, intelligent people, and I'm me. So when I read research, I mean, the primary research, which is full of like charts and numbers, and man, I just die. I glaze over, and it's very difficult for me to access that. I mean, so in the sake of, what am I trying to say here? For the sake of like trying to cater to my own laziness here, is there anyone out there who's like really doing a good job of aggregating some of these best practices into something more digestible, perhaps to teachers who are busy and who have, a lot of demands on their time and they have families and all the rest of the thing? I mean, is there an easier way to access other than going straight to primary research? This episode of Ed is brought to you by Let's Do Coffee. It's a podcast by the Maji Center at NAIT. Hosted by Daniel Van Vielen and produced by the Maji Center for New Venture and Student Entrepreneurship at NAIT, each episode features an interview with a student entrepreneur or NAIT alumnus. They dive into topics that explore their challenges, their questions, and their fears involved in operating their companies. Episodes come out every 2 weeks, and you can find the show at nait.ca/Maji Center. That's MAWJICENTRE. All right, let's get back into it with Michael and Laurence.
I think the answer is certainly yes. And I don't know all of them. I know some of them. Mm-hmm. I've been, especially before we started the show, while I was still a classroom teacher, I really relied heavily on the professional organizations. I know our state, Kansas Association of Biology Teachers, runs a fantastic blog, and I relied on those teachers to be sharing what they're doing and their justification for why they were doing them. I know I leaned on them heavily. The national arm, so NABT or NSTA, they do a really great job of publishing. They publish journals. They're not peer-reviewed journals, right. But they process a lot of what you're describing. They have people who digest something that they think is meaningful to more teachers, and then put it into a format that's more accessible for those teachers. So I've got to give a +1 to the professional organizations, and I've mentioned the biology and science-focused ones. But I know even as I've become more active on Twitter, there are folks in all the disciplines. You mentioned that you have some English experience in your background. I know the National Council of Teachers of English also has been sharing lots of great literacy stuff. That's been enriching my practice the last year that I've been following them. So professional organizations, I think, exclamation point. I really like what the professional organizations are doing for teachers.
Right on.
My response is a little different. And it's kind of, I have to give it cautiously. There are a lot of books out there. Mm-hmm. There are a lot of books. You can never run out of books to read on education. And the trick is, to me, looking for the ones that are grounded in research. So individuals that have conducted the research, and then those findings have been translated into a narrative that is more digestible than maybe the concrete reading. And there are some of those that are actually challenge a lot of traditional practices. And once you kind of have that, you're kind of looking at the world in a new way. Once you've put yourself in that position, then you start seeing other things that you can start using. And so if there's someone who's interested in what I want to read something about education that's not so thick, I would recommend the book Make It Stick. I think is a good starting point. What's the author on that?
Peter Brown, as I recall. Yeah, I second that recommendation. It was something that a lot of folks in our department read and really shaped our professional conversations for quite a while afterwards. I generally, when I'm looking at books, I flip to the back first. And if I find a bibliography of references to the studies that they're using, I am interested in reading that book. If I flip to the back and find a notes section, or I find example worksheets, I probably don't buy that book.
Interesting. Okay, I like that. Because I've read some books. I think from the latter category you just mentioned, where I read it and it's like, okay. That was neat, but I don't get a lot out of it. So I think that's a really good point to actually be, a nice little shortcut, if you will. Like, find these books, flip to the back. Is there a bunch of research that's happened behind the scenes? There has. Excellent. Read it. I think that's a really great workaround for finding books that are helpful. And I'm gonna have to. I'm gonna have to pick your brains maybe a little later, and you give me a few more. But
we have more, and obviously that's a heuristic. So I'm not saying that every book that doesn't have a deep bibliography is not good. That's not what I'm saying. But there, we talk a lot. Woodruff and I talk a lot about in our off-air discussions about the research is guiding our practice, but research doesn't answer every question, and research wasn't done on the students we have right now. So there's a place for judgment, right? There's a place for following your intuition and your observations and your professional judgment within the space where research doesn't address. But if your book is entirely written on an author's intuition, then how much are they adding to my own intuition, right? They're either saying things inconsistent with the research, or they're saying things that I should be making those judgments for myself. So of course it's a heuristic, it's a shortcut, but it's, we should not undervalue referencing your justifications.
Okay. Because a lot of these books, you read them and it is essentially just like listening to somebody talk about their own experiences, and that's basically a memoir. That can be interesting, but you're right. It's not as helpful as something that's backed up with, something that's been tested. And Lawrence, you talked a lot about, the research addressing a lot of systemic issues that there are in education. So not to put too negative a spin on it, but what are some of the things systemically that we're doing wrong that need to be addressed, do you feel?
Let's talk about grades.
Oh, yes, let's.
Yeah, we both listened to your check-in episode just from what was it, 2 weeks ago? Yeah, check-in 30. We both listened to your check-in, so that put us both in a space of like, hey, we want to think about grades. So this isn't coming out of nowhere. We listened to that episode. We're like, hey, let's talk about that.
Yeah. It sounds like you guys have a really complex system of managed communication, as opposed to having a total autonomous authority over your grade book. So before I get into some of my musings of some of that discussion that you guys had in Check-in 30, can you explain what the process is and what some of those issues were about grades and students that you guys were navigating?
Okay, sure. And I'm going to get this a little bit wrong, I'm sure, because I actually have to have the policy in front of me, because it's many, many steps. But essentially, if somebody doesn't hand something in, the basic idea is that we're not allowed to give zeros because it doesn't reflect student learning. And to that end, yeah, I agree. You can't, a 0 doesn't tell you what a student has or has not learned because nothing has been assessed. But in order to get around that, it's a very long process of, well, first you meet with the student and you extend their deadline by a week, and you set a new due date, and then it doesn't come in, then you contact parents and you set another due date, and then if it doesn't come in, then you have to contact the parents and the administration, and then work with the student, and they have to come in after school or whatever it is at a prescribed time, etc. And then if all those things fall through, then it turns into a 0. And then you multiply that by however many students you have. So, well, I shouldn't say by however many, but by many. And the negative impact we're finding with this policy is that students very quickly realize, I don't have to hand things in when they're due. And, they tend to, as they fall by the wayside, if I fall short of that policy and I'm not on them, all the time, then I wind up with this enormous backlog of nothing, of things not being handed in, and then students forget about it, and then it just turns into big mess. And I'm not speaking just personally, I'm speaking this is how it is. So it's an issue. And I wish I wish we'd gone back, and I would actually re-record it, because I listened to another podcast called Ed History 101. I just interviewed the host, Jen Binnis, and she did an episode on historical grading and the challenges of why it exists, where it came from, and why it's so problematic. And the idea is that, that learning happens internally. It's a purely internal process with neurons and dendrites and all those things in your head. And then what we're trying to do is take a measurement of that. And so any measurement we do is going to be imperfect because it's not directly accessing the actual phenomenon that's occurred. And that blows my mind and also really interests me as well. So what's your take on the grading thing then?
Great. One, we like that lead, that Ed History 101, and that discussion about learning being an internal process. We are both very strongly in that boat, so we're gonna follow that down. Mm-hmm. And there are plenty of issues and contentions about zeros, so we don't even need to stick our oars in those waters. But we do need to assess the students, and they do. Someone made the comment that they need to provide the burden that they have met some standard, or they know something, or that they can do something. The students have to do something for that to illustrate that, mm-hmm. and that is absolutely true. But you guys are working I guess I'm going to be critical here. You are working in what I would identify an entirely nightmarish system, where you have so many prescribed steps to exercise you're not actually exercising your judgment. This is teach by numbers, do this thing, and then if X happens, great. If Y happens, do this thing, and then if X happens, great. If Y happens, do this thing. Mm-hmm. And so you are just sort of pushing buttons down the row, I think that deprofessionalizes our job. I am really sad that you have to work in that environment. So one, you have my condolences.
Thank you.
And if I saw some administrators or people on the Board of Education, fine, be angry. That's one. So how do you solve this problem? How do you navigate this system if this is the one that you're in? And there were kind of two things that were coming up. One, the mechanism for grading, and two, there was a secondary question about student motivation. I'd like to work with the what I think is the lighter of those two issues first, the actual mechanics of grading. Mm-hmm. So how do you navigate this system? One, how many assignments are you making them do?
Because we had like an ongoing conversation in our department back when it was my department, back when I was in the department. There are not very many grades in my grade book when I was in the high school level, and I was on the high end of some of my closest collaborators. So we fondly talk about, not fondly, but we reference colloquially, the big pile of nope. So like if students are turning in 3 or 5 assignments a week, if they've got daily work that I have to check off, then as you mentioned, that multiplies geometrically, and that becomes untenable really, really fast. And so one of the early conversations that we had as teachers in our department was, if that can't be, what would be the fewest number of evaluations I need to give to be confident that I know whether or not my students know the things that they need to know. So can I get that done in 5 assignments in a semester? Could I know whether or not they know those things with just those 5? Well, I think yes, I think I can do that. Okay, well, or any of those redundant, can I get it down to 4? Can I get it down to 3? I don't know.
I have 4 grades in my grade book each semester, and that's it. And when the students have not met those benchmarks, those standards, those goals, if they have not achieved or convinced me that they know the material that assignment or grade or task represented, then they don't. I have a floor of 50, so I put a 50 in, but they have a 50 in that assignment. And so it is on them to say, hey, I know this. And I'm like, well, how? Prove to me that you do, and then I will give you the credit. And so I don't have to chase them down for 20 assignments that they haven't turned in. I have 4 tasks that they need to be responsible for. And so that right there cuts down, even if I have a system where I have to follow all of these 8 steps in order to confirm that they get the grade that I put in there, I only have to do that for 4 assignments.
No. But we teach pretty different stuff than what you teach. So where are you landing on all of this?
I am in constant flux. I change every year. We do have sort of department guidelines as to how many assessments we're supposed to have, at least in core, but this is my first year not teaching core. So this year for me has been a real, I don't want to say eye opener, but it's been a big shift for me. So at the end of the year, basically, I went through the year, my first time through these courses, and just kind of did what was done before, learning along the way. And I added a couple of things and tweaked a few things, but ultimately just, used what the previous teacher had used. And now that I'm at the end of the year, I kind of looking back saying, okay, now what? Like sort of discovering as I went what worked and what didn't. So for me, this summer and next year is going to be a big shift to actually answer some of these questions. So I like that we're talking about this stuff.
Yeah. Because when you say department requirement, do you mean that there is a minimum or that there is a maximum?
I think there's both, if I recall correctly. So there's a certain number. Yeah, there's just, we are going to do this many. Because I remember, there's like a district requirement or a district guidelines. And then as a department, like I'm speaking purely from my experience teaching in the English department, they said, you need to have this many assessments or this many writing assessments. And we said, well, that's impossible because we're human beings. We can do this many. So, we brought it, made it down a little bit smaller. So,
sure.
That's sort of how we worked that out. I think it was like 8 assessments, I think, in a semester was what we had to come down to, I think.
So does that mean there are 8 grades in the grade book during a semester?
Yes, that's correct. Yeah.
It is.
Alongside, formative assessments as well, which and they often appear in the grade book, but are weighted at 0, so they don't actually impact the grade.
Nice.
Yeah. That's good.
Yeah, it's not a bad setup. It's not a bad setup. But at the same time, like for me, like doing computers, I had way too many projects, way too many assignments that were going in the grade book, and it was crushing by the end. So I do want to break things down into smaller sets, and have maybe one assessment for a whole unit with lots of smaller formative things leading up to it. So, which is kind of how it should be anyway. But that's
and you talk about figuring it out, and I was in that place. This was a handful of years ago. Mm-hmm. But when I first decided to pursue some new priorities in my classroom, because there was a time where I had a grade book with lots of entries in it, and there were many redundancies in how I was taking my grades. And so when I finally decided, hey, I want to try to just commit to the assessments that I really feel strongly about. I had to torch huge parts of my syllabus, and I was really treading some unfamiliar ground, which I hadn't been on since my first year of teaching. And I was really in that same place, man. That during that first year, I was like, I don't know. I think this might be the time for the next big assessment, but I could very well be making big mistakes. When I got done at the end of the school year, I was like, wow, there are a lot of things I'm going to do differently my second year, right? Mm-hmm. And so I think that's an important story to share with folks is being ready to pursue something that we think is better is not the same as doing it perfectly in our first outing, right? Just do it better every year. And I made some big mistakes in my first couple of years when I was trying to do some things differently. So I think be commended that you're being reflective and that you're looking to continue to pursue a priority and make changes, because we're not wed to our practices, right? So things change and we get better. So I would just say I'm right there with you, man.
Right on. I love it. You talked to about, you've only got these, say, 4 assessments going on. And I'm just going to go out on a limb and say that I bet you have students who sometimes don't hand those things in. Yes?
Yeah,
of course.
Absolutely.
So we talk about student motivation. What do you do beyond just you've got a really scary looking mark on your report card coming up. What do you do beyond that in terms of student motivation?
Well, one is that I'm not afraid of them not handing things in. That I'm not afraid of that. I don't even tell them, like one of the comments that I heard in that Check Up 30 episode was somebody said, this system kind of promotes, kind of encourages us to sort of lie about due dates. And my response to that is stop lying about due dates. I tell my kids, this is when I'm going to put it in the grade book. But you can turn it in whenever you can do this. You can do a good job. Whenever you can do a good job doing this, that's when I want it. I don't want crap work on time. I want your best work. So take as much time as you need to do that. And so some of them will have zeros early, and it looks scary. And I'm like, well, are you doing anything to improve it? And the thing is, like your reference earlier, your Ed History 101, that learning process is internal and in their head. We can't make them do that. They can only do that themselves. So all we can do is say, here is the situation. And whenever you want to deal with it, I am here to help you do that. And I do not write them on it at all. And I get them. They come to me.
Mm-hmm. Well, and I think what's interesting I fought this system for 2 years. Like I was a part of the conversations in our department, but I did not accept it for a little while. And something that I had to get over as I was pondering and reflecting and considering making changes in my practice was I often set up, I can have no due dates and some of them will turn it in late. But I kind of lost sight of the other side of I have this really prescriptive late work policy and I still get them late. I don't get to choose between late and not late. I get to choose between two systems where in both of them, some students abuse the system, some students turn it in really late. So once I finally accepted, I'm already getting really late work. So how can I instead turn my attention to making sure that work is the best it is when it can be, was a really important shift in my mind.
So is that part of what you would consider the best practice? I mean, what's the research telling us about grading right now?
That's the best question.
I didn't even have that.
Yeah, we don't have our citations at the ready. You put us to the question, and we love that you did. That is the right question always. Yeah. And we've discussed it on our podcast, and we're scrambling to respond to that in a meaty way.
I'm going to start with a name, if it pleases the court. I'm going to start with a name. Rick Wormley is the author of several of the pieces that we discussed, actually very recently on an episode where we treated grades. And he with I want to say O'Brien, I think was the other author, published a heavily cited paper back in like 2012, I think it was, that really kind of laid out the underpinnings of what a lot of people consider standards-based grades now. Which is something that we both accept. We really liked that work, and Rick Wormley in particular is awesome. I really like him just as an educator. He's really communicative. He's active online. He travels to our district to speak at our district's professional development like every year. Cool. Like he just comes in and does it. So it's so I'm going to give a name as kind of the initial reference for where we point when we say think about grading. He actually even has a book out that I think it's just on his second edition right now. Fair isn't always equal. That also discusses
equal isn't always fair.
I'm going to look that up. But anyway, he has a book out that also discusses a lot of these practices in a more digestible format if you don't want to look to his primary literature.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I've heard the name Rick Wormley.
Oh, you're right.
Rick Wormley. Yeah, I said his name wrong for a decade.
Okay, equal isn't always fair?
No, fair isn't always equal.
Ralph was right, I was wrong.
Okay, fair. Okay. Well,
which is probably, he was right, I was wrong, is probably like the cornerstone of our relationship. We both say it, and it is necessary for both of us to say it when it happens. Yeah.
Fair enough. You got to keep each other honest, right? Especially with all these citations floating around.
For sure.
Right on. Yep.
Yeah, go ahead.
No, go ahead.
Well, okay. We talked a little about grading when we gave some names, but if you want to talk about motivation, you're going to have to start talking about some deep science. You're going to have to start talking about neurology and how our brains function, because that's really what motivation is about. Is that something you want to do? Can we use the space for that?
Guys, just yeah, you bet. Light it up.
All right. Let's talk about...
So it's just light conversations, right?
Yeah. Let's talk about the nucleus accumbens. This is a part of your brain that rewards you by giving you certain neurotransmitters. And I'm going to go with the star of the show, dopamine. It is the general feel-good. It is the general feel-good chemical in your brain. And you get it when your brain sees you do something that it thinks is great for your survival, like eating sugar, because sugar is packed with energy, and energy is what we need to keep our body going. So eat sugar, feel good. That's your brain doing that to you. It also does that to you when you achieve that little, like that I just mowed the lawn and that sucked, but I feel good that it's done. That comes from dopamine. And when you are practicing juggling and you're dropping them all on the ground for hours, and then all of a sudden you can do it 8 in a row and you give yourself a high five, that is also dopamine. So we get it for survival behaviors, we get it for accomplishments, and we get it for competency. Yeah. And those are the basis for human motivation.
And so a story that I tell a lot in this context is, I have been frustrated about students in my class who are disengaged with me while I'm giving a lecture. And there's a student in the back corner who is ignoring me and on her phone. And I might say to a colleague in the hallway, that student is so unmotivated, she doesn't listen to anything I say. But if I look more closely at that example, halfway through the lecture, she emotes. She's like, oh yeah. And keeps on, because she just beat a level on the game she's playing on her phone. She is learning in that moment. She is in fact getting better at something. And I watched her get excited because she accomplished something that she'd been working on for a few minutes. It had nothing to do with biology. It wasn't what I wanted her to be doing, but she was learning because we are as humans inherently wired to feel good about getting better at things. And so I think the trick for us as teachers is not how do we make students do what we want them to do, but how do we make sure the things that they're doing build competency. And then once that hooks in, we'll just let them go, because it feels great to get better at things.
When they believe they are learning, they are with you. So, well, go ahead.
No, so what you're saying, the corollary to that then is if they don't think there's anything to learn in your class, they're just going to sit there and be uninterested, unmotivated.
Yeah.
Well, and even the alternative, even some of the students who want to be good at school, right? They're extrinsically motivated by points, and parents are paying them for grades, and they're looking forward to scholarships. And so they're willing to do whatever it is you tell them they must do to get an A. They're still not sitting in your class engaging in sense making, right? They're still not pursuing meaning and making connections to their existing understanding and their prior experiences. They're sitting there waiting for the next cue to make sure that they can get the points that they need to get the reward that they need. So even in a scenario where they're compliant, if we're not pushing them to engage in pursuit of competency, then their growth's going to be really limited, because all they're doing is looking for the next lever to pull so that they can get that point reward.
Sorry, I'm just writing down compliance does not equal motivation.
Oh! We love that that's what you took away from that, because compliance doesn't equal learning either, right? So you have, quote, good students and bad students, and I think those labels actually go to compliant students and non-compliant students, and we call compliant students good and we call non-compliant students bad. But those labels are terrible. They're misinforming us. One of the things that what happens is if you ever actually buy into and start trying to implement standard-based grading, what you find is that what you need from your kids is for them to prove to you that they know what they're talking about and how to do it. And you can set the difficulty wherever you want that to be, because it's your classroom, right? And some of us set it super high, and some of us are starting out, maybe they set it lower, and then they increase their resolution. But they have to, you've set a standard for some competency in your classroom, and they have to prove it to you. And when they get more choices and more practice regarding how they prove that to you, they can see themselves improve. And when they see themselves improve, their brain gives them dopamine. And then they feel that in your classroom. And then they want more of that in your classroom. And so then they say, well, what do I do to improve now? Or what can I do now to show you that I've learned? And then you say, well, let's look at how you are preparing. And you can give them feedback on their process. And what happens is you're going to get a couple students that are just not going to buy in at all ever. And that may be because they've got bigger problems than your classroom. And that's fine. But a lot of the students can say, hey, if I do this, I can see myself grow. And then once they taste that dopamine for that freedom of expression that you've given them, they will come back.
I've got a really fun story that is an example of that. In a few years ago in my freshman biology course, I had a student who we had a good relationship, but he was not motivated by school in general. He didn't see himself, high school was his terminal level of education, and he was just going to get through it. Wasn't particularly interested in passing because credit recovery was fine for him. But as we worked together by, later in the school year, he started to believe, I actually do know a few of these questions. He had already opted out of the lab procedure that we've been doing at that point. But as I came around and talked to him, I was like, hey, what level are you trying to achieve? What level of ability is your current target? And he's like, I'm just not going to do any of it. And I paused. I didn't say anything. He's like, well, and he looked down at the paper and he thought, well, wait a second. I actually know how to do that. So you're telling me if I just do this, I ignore all the other stuff, I just do this thing, that I'll get a C. And I was like, yeah, that's exactly what I'm telling you. And he's like, but I can do that. And I was like, I want that. I want you to do that. And he's like, okay. And so he worked for a period of time in class. And then when he got done, he called me and was like, hey, grade this right now. And I was like, okay. So I look at it and I was like, yeah, you did. You crushed it. You knew that. You got it. And he's like, I have a C on this right now. I have a C in the grade book. And I was like, yeah. He's like, put it in the grade book. So I walk over there and type it into the grade book. And he's like, yeah. And he stood up and he cheered in my class, like in a quiet room. And he held up his paper. He's like, look at that. I got a C. I earned that C. And he was totally correct. Like, he did earn that C. And I think seeing a student be excited for C work because he earned it and it meant he could do something, not that he got a question wrong, a C associated with competency was really exciting for me and for him. It was great that I can do this. And I love that story, so I tell it every chance I get.
His story has an embedded challenge to grading that he didn't really say. I mean, he kind of hinted at it at the end, but he wasn't looking at that kid's paper and saying he got this wrong, so it's a 95. He got this wrong, so it's 90. He got this wrong, so it's an 85. He said the kid starts at 0, which is why I'm fine with zeros in the grade book. Everybody starts at 0. You haven't shown me that you can do anything. And he said, yeah, you've ignored all this part of the assignment, but you did this part. That shows me that you've met this standard. That's one of X many standards, or this is one level of competency that I've defined. That quality work is worth a C. You got the C. You earned the C. And that kid felt his nucleus accumbens give him dopamine from illustrating that competency. The same way little babies that successfully grab that pencil giggle for the first time when they actually can get their hand to grasp the pencil. They're happy about that. So it's rewarding. No, we don't have to do it. Their brain will reward them for competency if you give them the space to choose and practice it.
And I think it's worth noting too, you're talking about working up from 0 too. I mean, because you could probably kill that dopamine really fast if there's a student who's like, yes, I did really great on this exam, and maybe they get 90 because you got this part wrong, right? Because then it's like, this is what you did wrong. This is what you did wrong. I mean, and students need to be guided and they need to have feedback. I mean, you can't just say, this is what you got right, and don't worry about the rest of that stuff.
Feedback is critical.
Yes.
Yeah, we're both emoting right now.
Yeah, but so at the same time, though, I mean, it's the idea of coming at it from a positive angle, saying, here's what you did, here's what you earned, here's what you got. And in the back of my mind, I'm like, could I get away with putting all my assignments in my grade book at the start of the year and putting zeros in for everybody?
I have lived that. I have thought about that fantasy, and I've imagined that scenario myself, and it's very, very tempting. One of the things that prevents me from doing that is that I actually changed my curriculum in response to my students' expressions. So, I don't know what all my assignments are going to be at the beginning of the year. Yeah. But if I did, let's say I did, I love that, because what you can do is you can gate them. You can initially put them in as not for grade, so they're not being calculated, and then you can unlock them and apply them for grading as the semester continues. And so kids that want to work ahead, you can put it in there ahead, and then when that date shows up, you can change it and it'll affect their grade. And so you can still have a pacing, and they will see the whole thing. And showing them their progress and having them acknowledge their growth is a part of this motivation. It's how our brains work. And so doing what you're talking about, they can see themselves make progress through the curriculum. And that visualization will help them reward themselves for participating.
Oh, I think I'm gonna write an email. I'm gonna email my admin and see what they think.
Tell us how this goes after you try.
Yeah, we definitely want to follow through on this, because when you're talking about doing research, this is actually how that begins. Because if you do this and you find that it revolutionizes your classroom, then you have the seed of a PhD right there. Like, you need to get lots of teachers to try it, collect lots of data, and publish that data to show that this is a practice that positively impacts our classroom. So, like you mentioned earlier about, using research and doing research, but if you're willing to go in and try something, and then that has initial positive results, then let's confirm those results. Let's see how scalable it is. Let's see how applicable it is. And I'm not doing that. I'm just sitting in my classroom teaching. But I want to read what you write and publish about doing this. That's what I want to do. I'll be like, yeah, let's do it. It's time for me to buck up and do it. I've had fantasies, but it's right here, raw numbers. Let's make this happen.
I love your attitude. You are definitely like a let's get her done kind of guy. I like that. I have no idea if I could be organized enough to actually pull together data. I'm very much a off the cuff, seat of my pants kind of guy.
Highly responsive.
That's the word. Highly responsive. Yeah. It's all in the wording, right? All in the branding. No, I mean, I'm by no means like I'm a great teacher and I do a really good job of what I do, but I also like to keep things loose. And like you say, when students are like, this is not working, or, this doesn't make any sense, or I want to do more of that. A lot of times I'll just be like, yep. Okay, sure. well, let's try that instead. We'll scrap something and try something different. Or, we're doing, I was doing coding with my kids near the end of the year, and we were using this thing called Kodu, which is comes out of Microsoft Labs. And it's really visual, and you can make games with it. It's very, very friendly up front. And then one kid was like, we want to learn Unity, which is like a 3D game engine.
Nice. Yeah.
And I said, okay, but if I see you messing around playing Minecraft, you're going back to Kodu. And they're like, okay. And they started like some really heavy stuff with Unity. And then there was 5 guys in my class, and they all stuck with it. Some of them got just about nowhere, but they were hammering away at it the entire time.
That's awesome, man.
Yeah. So they got to choose how they developed how they exhibited their proficiency, and then they could see their own growth, so they were motivated.
Yeah, absolutely. And then at the end, I'm just like, they said, I didn't really finish this game. I'm like, just write me a report, give me some screenshots, and show me what you did. And they're like, okay. And it worked really well. So, that doesn't work in all situations. But the point is, trying to plan that far ahead when those kind of situations arise on such a frequent basis is a bit difficult. But I did collect data once to test a theory that I had. I don't know how ironclad the data was. But I had, I always tell my students in exams, I'm like, slow down, take your time, read carefully, or, whatever. And I actually plotted achievement on both multiple choice, like reading comprehension, and on an essay writing part of an exam. I plotted their achievement versus the amount of time they spent on the, to see how those things correlated. And they didn't at all, which was really weird to me. My sample size was about like 60 kids, so I don't know how ironclad that is, but it was really interesting just to kind of sit there and actually crunch some numbers and see what you could do with it. That part was kind of a fascinating thing. No matter how valid my results were, it's not like I'm pinning too much on that stuff. But yeah, that can be kind of a fun thing to do, and it would be interesting thought to actually get start collecting data on what we're doing in class and see try and get better at measuring the efficacy of whatever it is we're doing. But I'm just yakking on here, guys.
I actually have some further questions for you if you're willing to yak some more.
Oh no, in the crosshairs. Yeah, fire away.
I understand that you teach a film class. Is that right?
Oh yeah, that's my baby.
Okay, yeah. Tell me what are your goals, your aims? What do you want those kids to get at the end? Like, with the ideal student who got everything that you hoped for them, what are the proficiencies or ideas?
And who started with nothing. So you walk in like, I don't even know what.
You got fresh students, and then so what do you want them to have value from your class at the end of it?
Well, okay, I teach grade 8 and a grade 9 class, and then a combined 10, 11, 12 class. So when the kids start out in grade 8, my main goal, independent of the curriculum, is basically they should watch films and think about them, and they should make films. Those are the 2 basic curriculum goals if you want to boil it down. So in grade 8, my idea is I want to sort of break wide open their concept of film, and that it's more than just the films that were released in the last 5 years. It's more than just Marvel. It's more than just Harry Potter. So I show them, we start with Jaws because it's really accessible. But Jaws is coming up on 50 years old. No, it is 50. No, 40. It's 40 years old, which is bonkers. So we do that, but then, I show them foreign films, I show them silent films, I show them just everything I can possibly squeeze into a semester, because that's grade 8. I just want them to understand that film is more than just what they know or what they think they know. And we get into technical stuff as well. So they have to make films, and they have to understand. Honestly, if they come out of grade 8 saying filmmaking is hard, I'm like, good, you learned something.
Yeah.
Grade 9, we do music videos every year. So we start looking at film as an experimentation format. So they have to, we study a ton of music videos, and then they have to go and they experiment. They do weird things, flip the camera upside down, try some in-camera effects, tell a nonlinear story, use imagery and symbolism, right? That kind of thing. So pushing out in that way. And then grade 10 through 12 is just where we get really heavy into production. And every year I teach it swings more and more towards the production side of things. So by the time they're in grade 12, they know how to produce a film in a professional manner. They actually, in high school, it's actually 3 courses that work together. So there's my class, which is writing, directing, producing. There's the drama class, which we audition the students, and sometimes we'll even bring in some acting coaches. This year we brought in a fight choreographer to help them with that. And then we have the digital media students who teach or who do like editing, camera work, lighting and all that stuff. And we send them out with gear. And so they work in these great big groups, and they produce films. And yeah, by the time they do their grade 12 projects, they are really astoundingly good filmmakers. And we also do study film as well in terms of history. So they have to understand the history of film, like understanding there's a continuity, understanding that film is an art form, and being able to kind of dive into that and take it apart and say, well, why is this good or why is this not good? So we get more heavy into the analysis as we go higher up in the grades. How's that?
Well, I love it. That's a great answer. I mean, that's what I wanted. I liked how you said at the end of their 12th grade year, they were astoundingly good filmmakers. Well, it turns out they've been practicing this thing with constructive feedback for 5 years at that point.
Yes.
So of course they are. Mm-hmm. Do anything with consistently self-initiated with constructive feedback for 5 years, you're going to be way better than you were when you started. Mm-hmm. So that's excellent. Also, they get to choose, because they're making the films, right? They get to choose how they express their competency. Mm-hmm. They get to see how they are growing, and therefore they are motivated to invest in that growth. Do you have non-response, non-handed in problems in your film classes?
This year in grade 8, I had one team not turn in a film, and that was the second film that was not handed in I'm going to say 8 years.
So it is very low. Non-response
basically
is very,
non-existent.
Very low. Yeah. It is a very unique when that happens. And that is consistent with what we know about how students are motivated. One of the comments that I heard from that check-in 30 was somebody said, this can work in performance-based classes. Mm-hmm. And the thing is that is absolutely true, because the students know that whatever that performance is, that's their expression of their competency, and they can monitor their growth to that performance. So the trick is to how can you change your class to be a performance-based class?
Right.
Because that's what you've done when they're making movies.
Mm-hmm. But I mean, it's inherent in the art form, right? I mean, you're making a film, it's meant to be exhibited. My question in the check-in, and I'll pause it here again, is how do you do that in math? How do you make math performance-based? And I'm sure there's ways you can do that, but I just lack imagination.
Yeah, I mean, that's an important question, right? Like that's something that merits further discussion.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. How can they perform? How can they exhibit their understanding of some kind of math proficiency?
Right. Well, I think this brings our conversation full circle. I mean, we started talking, we talked about how the system is so big and it's hard to steer, and we've got this, weight of this is the way we've always done it. I mean, if you want to make math performance-based, you're going to have to burn it all down in a lot, maybe not all of it, but a great big deal of it. You have to change the way you're doing business in order to make that kind of thing happen. Would it be better? I mean, you're the research guys. You could probably tell me if it would be better. But if you did want to make the change, it's a big, big, big change, right? It's funny you used the term burn it all down, because that was something that we used to some controversy in one of our very early episodes. There are some things that we do that are great. There are plenty of math teachers out there doing good stuff, but there are some fundamental assumptions about math education that need to be challenged. And there's research to go along with that. I'm going to say Jo Boaler, since we have the opportunity. She's done some really important math educational research that I think would shine some light on that subject. We've been talking for quite a while, but maybe at some point in the future, math education, that's a conversation.
One of the problems of not just math, but lots of subjects is this idea that students, we can teach them linearly, when in fact we don't actually have very much control over how they are building their understanding of the world, because, as you mentioned earlier, it's happening internally. So just because we give a series of lessons in mathematics that are like logically oriented, that logical orientation is from our teaching perspective and not their sense-making, understanding perspective. Right. So I've got to do this lesson before I can do that lesson, so that they can have this, so that they can do this, so that they can do this, so that they're ready by the next year to start this in August. That is kind of a fallacy. Whereas if you let them express their proficiencies, you can respond by saying, okay, this is where we're weak. And so that's what we're going to do next. Mm-hmm. And that there's a lot of things, and that linear content delivery idea is a problem in math, but it's a problem in lots and lots of topics. So that's a whole big issue.
It absolutely is. It absolutely isn't. But guys, I'm looking at the clock here. We're going coming up on 1 hour and 10 here. This is, I think, we're setting a record here for longest episode ever.
Wow.
Which is, I know. I'm having a great time here, but I feel like maybe we should aim for a part 2, maybe over on your side of the podcast a little later on down the road.
Yeah, we get it. It's
also, there's 2 of us. So we're sorry about that. Oh, and if you want to cut me out entirely, that's fine. Ralph can carry it.
No, not a hope, guys. This has been fun. Here, one more kick at the can. Is there anything else you wanted to add here before we sign off?
No, I'm happy. Thanks for having us.
Yeah, we really appreciate the invitation. It's been a lot of fun. Discuss research, man. It's the thing we should do.
Yeah.
Yeah, I like that. I like that a lot. Actually, here, before we go then, 2 things. Tell me a little bit about your podcast. I mean, people probably could put that together by now, but tell me about your podcast, and then how can people get a hold of you if they want to follow that or follow you?
So our podcast is 2 Pint PLC. We're on all the major distribution networks. We're hosted on SoundCloud, but we have our own website, 2pintplc.com, where you can run down any of the citations that we've referenced, many of them even here on the show. So if you want to see access to the primary literature or the other more consumable popular literature that may make that a little bit more accessible. So you can get all of that on 2pintplc.com or iTunes or Stitcher or wherever it is that you want to do your podcast stuff. And there's also a contact form on that website. Or you can tweet at me at Ralph CSTEM. If you have questions, you want to come on, if you want us to read something and process it on a show, we love to be responsive to listeners. So give us anything that you may want us to do, and we would love to collaborate.
Fantastic.
Yeah.
Well, thank you both guys for carving out this big chunk of your day to chat with me. I really appreciate it. This has been a lot of fun, guys.
Thank you.
It has. Yeah, thanks a lot.
This week's episode of Ed is brought to you by the Alberta Podcast Network, powered by ATB. You can find all the podcasts over at albertapodcastnetwork.com. And while you're there, why not look up The Read Along? It's a brand new member of the network, and it's a podcast self-described as a mini book club for your ears. Each week, they go through one chapter of their selected book in depth. And the husband-wife team of Scott and Anita are insightful, fun, and their book selections are always interesting. Now is a great time to get on board, as they'll be starting a new novel right as you're hearing this. So you can find that and all the other member podcasts at albertapodcastnetwork.com. And if you want to get in touch, or you'd like to be a guest on this show, you can email me at theedpodcast@gmail.com or hit me up on Twitter at theedpodcast. If you want to listen to more of Ed, you can head over to the website, theedpodcast.podbean.com, or you can find us on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or the podcatcher of your choice. Just search up Ed Conversations. Ed can also be heard on VoiceEd Radio. It's 24-hour internet broadcasting devoted to the best ideas in education. Just head over to voiced.ca. So on behalf of myself and Michael and Lawrence, thanks so much for listening, and we'll catch you next time. Bye.